they're quite important. So I just wanted to say this, and I'll stop here. I could go on forever. I mean, really, thank you, Beata. Thank your team. I know that Elena and probably many others were behind this, and you did an amazing job. And I just want more. And I stop here.
Okay. Wow. Okay, great. So I think we have sort of largely used up our time for panel discussion. I want to have enough time for questions from the floor. So I think I'm going to just ask Beata one question, and then we will see. And maybe the other panelists should feel free to chip in on that question as well if they want. And so, the great thing about this report is that it offers sort of a bunch of stuff that's fresh and not necessarily goes all in the same direction, right? So there is some what you could view as giving you pause, particularly in chapter 1, right, on some of the potential motives and characteristics of industrial policy, the fact that most policies are discriminatory, which suggests that maybe they are not driven mainly by market failures, but by economic nationalism. The fact that the distortion, the degree to which policies are distortive, is correlated with the ease of implementation, right? The easier, the more distortive policies are those that are easier to implement and hence get more implemented by, governments that probably shouldn't be trying this, right? And so another sort of cautionary tale. And then you have all these material that, looks constructively at various types of industrial policies, but, not necessarily in the way that the discussion is focused on in public. And so particularly you have this emphasis on services, right? Because these days, industrial policy is all, in the Draghi report particularly, it's all about protecting manufacturing or, pushing manufacturing. You make this a very interesting twist that, hey, some countries actually the link between services and manufacturing is important, or indeed services-based growth is important. So how about industrial policy in that context? And then you have this thing about special economic zones, which I think, I take it as, it's very nuanced. You show this use can work regionally. Yeah. The interesting thing there is, special economic zones, I'm not sure they're motivated mostly through regional effects, right? They're motivated by, countries with weak business environments thinking that this is a way of, raising the whole level of development in the whole country, right? I'm not sure how much you engage with this question, but you focus on these local effects. You show it has local effects, which is kind of what one would expect at a minimum. I think you also showed that as you go a little further away, the effects become negative. I don't know how you didn't emphasize that much in your discussion, but maybe that's just because you're pulling activity into the zone, so maybe one shouldn't interpret it. And then you have this very cautionary story again that the rule of law is actually important for the success of the special economic zone. And I understand this to be a rule of law indicator, not just specific to that economic zone, but countrywide, right? It's a regional rule of law indicator. So in that sense, you cannot really beat. You probably cannot make it work unless you have some rule of law. So it's not a way of, in a way, defying gravity and creating prosperity when the basics are not there. So it's another cautionary thing. Okay, sorry. So this was what I liked about this, and I'm just picking on the points that you mentioned in your presentation. Now, I have one sort of big, something I'm obsessed with, and you touched on it in this report, which is this issue of economic nationalism, the fact that this is just a rising trend, more or less coinciding with the trend towards more industrial policy. So my interpretation is, why do we see this rising trend? Yes, it's about more demand for government, but it's also about this general shift towards protectionism and trying to support the home team against the foreign team. And so, that makes you think a little bit differently about industrial policy, but none of this came out in your policy implications. So your policy implications were all what I would sort of call, the conventional kind, which is, these policies can work if they are competitive, if you have enough supportive institutions and so forth. But in the end, to what extent does the fact that these policies tend to be nationalist create a trade-off? In what sense does it create a trade-off? So suppose you have the entire world follow the policy implications, the policy recipe, as you called it, that you give at the very end, but they are discriminatory policies. Right? These things are consistent. You can follow that down the book, depending on exactly on how you define openness and competition. You can have a national version of competitive contestability, so to speak, and yet be extremely nationalist. And so in those circumstances, should we push industrial policies, even if they are nationalist, provided that they observe the rest of your catalog, because at least they would be good locally, and then what about globally? Is this then globally a good idea? We have a whole bunch of perfect but highly discriminatory industrial policies. What's the net impact? And then finally, does the answer depend in a way on the level of development? So the way I tend to think about it is, imagine a central planner, a global central planner. Would that grand central planner recommend, so we don't have nations in this world, but we still have different regional levels of development. Would that global central planner recommend regionally discriminatory industrial policies? And I think here, the industry argument would say perhaps yes. So perhaps, local protection for the underdeveloped regions is actually globally optimal because you get these guys to catch up. But can you ever justify, from a global central planner's perspective, discriminatory industrial policies in advanced countries? Because that's what we are seeing right now, right? I mean, the whole debate right now is about, should the EU be much more aggressive on buying European than we have been in the past? So it's fully part of this trend. You don't really engage with it in the recommendations.
So thank you for bringing up these points. As Chiara rightly pointed out, we take the world as it is, and then we say, well, given what's happening, if you must do industrial policy, this is what you should keep in mind. And, we are not engaging with the question of what a global central planner would do, as the chances for global coordination are becoming lower and lower. But, I would point out that even in the context of developing countries, I think infant industry protection has not delivered, because if you are less developed, you tend to have poor institution, and you don't have a mechanism for phasing out protection awarded to the infants, which spend their time lobbying for a continuation of protection rather than growing up. So, it's not optimal what's happening in the world. And we do, in a sense, show that and we give a warning by saying the fact that 99.0% of industrial policies in advanced economies discriminate against foreign interest means that industrial policies are becoming a mechanism for rolling back of globalization. And, as industrial policy is coming back, and as it's going to continue because countries will respond to policies done by others, that's going to speed up this process of undoing global integration.
Which I take it is good, right? Global integration is good?
It is good. As a trade economist, I can't say anything else.
Okay. Thank you. These days, people need to be reminded of that. Okay, great. So let's go for questions again. I don't know. Do we have Slido stuff? There is. Okay, there's only one question on Slido, which I'm going to take back. It was already a while ago. Any questions from the floor? Okay, we have a whole bunch. Okay. All right, very difficult, very difficult. Okay, let me start with Zsolt, because Hungary had so much prominence in this report, and then we'll go around, but please remind me, okay? I have the gentleman in the back, I have the gentleman in front, I have the lady there, Nina, and okay, good. All right, go.
Thank you. I'm Zsolt Orvos from Bruegel. Bruegel originally from Hungary, but I will not ask about Hungary. And I will just ask one question on on how to assess the success of existing industrial policies. So you started with a chart showing thousands of policies in your region, in US, China. And what should be the metric of assessing them? It also relates to Jaromír's question, whether they are discriminatory and have, causes distortions as well. But is it possible to say that, let's say 1/3 of the measures achieve their goal at a reasonable price, 1/3 achieved their goal but at a horrible price, so it was very ineffective, and 1/3 was complete failure. So is there kind of metric to check what existing policies achieved? Thank you.
Okay, we are collecting questions, and then the entire panel will get a chance to. Okay, Nina, you introduce yourself, please.
My name is Nina Vujanovic, Bruegel Affiliate Fellow. Thank you very much for the presentation of this great report. I would like to connect this report to Mario Draghi report in the context of the countries you're studying. All of these economies are the lower end of the global value chains. Their innovation that hasn't been well addressed, in my view, in Mario Draghi report, meaning that they mostly innovate not through R&D, but more like knowledge use other than knowledge creation. So my question is, what type of industrial policy mix can we think of in the context of some of the EBRD economies? You mentioned that industrial policies with a couple of objectives are not that successful because some objectives are eventually streamlined. But these economies have are in need of multifaceted approach because they like human capital to promote innovation. Their education is not at the level needed for them to grow through innovation, and then so structural change is a little bit harder. So I'm curious what complementary maybe policy mix is needed. Yes.
Great. I think Chiara also will have something to say on this. Gentleman in the back, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm Mr. Baruti. I'm lawyer by training, specialized in shipping and maritime issues and economical as well. I will come back for the issue of special economic zone that you refer. When you say that it's very difficult to predict the results of zone economic, special zone economic, but in my view, the special zone economic is a kind of policy request to boost some place where the market of business is weak, and the special zone economy come with some fiscal facilities, and most of time with a time to reach all those criteria. The requester should give some guarantee and some result before that before to receive the authorization to set up a special zone economic. And how you can say that it's difficult to predict, because if the special zone economic should be renewed, it should be assessed on some criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucio, please.
Thank you. Lucio Penck, Bruegel, formerly the European Commission. On the Anna Karenina quote, I would tend to disagree. I think that unhappy families also have common feature. And when it comes to industrial policy, the common feature is incumbent capture, which is the exact opposite of the benevolent dictator that you were hypothesizing at world level. So in the light of this, I have two related questions. One perhaps more for Sasha, who mentioned the competitiveness compass. It's true, by and large, it addresses the priority highlighted in the Draghi report. But there is a big difference. Where the money comes from, I mean, Draghi proposed a common pool solution, borrowing. The competitive compass essentially proposes relaxing state aid. Just at the moment when the Commission was releasing the competitive compass, an IMF study that probably Sasha has seen but is not quoted in the competitive compass finds that, a sophisticated economics study, that state aids typically increases revenues and employment at recipient firm, not investment and productivity, which fits with the sharing of the rents simple model. And moreover, the effect on the industry overall more than undo any positive effect to the recipient industry. So basically, if we believe this study, which is more sophisticated than the evidence the Commission provides, the expected results are going to be bad for the things that we care about, industrial policy, productivity. Linked to that, if we see how the money is moving now, I think we see, we like it or not, the militarization of industrial policy, much more the money, and almost by definition, the defense sector, it has an inbuilt regulatory capture mechanism. So there is the Italian tank firm that produces a tank that is considered to be the only one that is more dangerous for its crew than for the enemy. And the German rifle assault maker that for the second time in the row produces an assault rifle that is not able to shoot straight. But I bet that the same firm will get the contract for the next tank and the next assault rifle.
Thank you for being even-handed at the European level, Lucio. And we need to be quick now. So, Nate, please introduce yourself briefly.
Nate Arnold with the IMF. Just since Lucio brought up our paper, I wanted to add we also have another paper that looks at the impact of state aid or industrial policy when you do it in a coordinated fashion and finds there are positive gains. So I think the part of the message about, you know, coordinating this is important, and, you know, hopefully looking forward to the next MFF, you can find some ways to use EU funds to help provide a more level playing field in that respect, at least.
Yeah, indeed, an important paper. I think it was even cited in the competitiveness compass, if I remember correctly. Final question in the back, very quick, please.
I'm Giovanni, and I'm a student. And my question is also based on what Lucio said. What about corruption? I think that the report barely mentions on what measures can be taken on how industrial policy influences corruption and state capture, I guess.
Okay, can we go in inverse order? Chiara, please start off. Address anything you would like to address, or nothing.
So very quickly, so one is, let me start with evaluation, which is something I care a lot about. And let me give you the ingredients for the recipe, like cakes. It doesn't mean that then things will come out nicely, but I think necessary condition for good evaluation is data. And as you see also in the report, often we don't have basic data on businesses and we don't have access to this data. So that, I would say, first ingredient, we need to push more, also sort of do some work to get more access to better data. Second, transparency, and this relates to data, but this time transparency on policies, know more about the design, the selection criteria for policies. And then finally, government capabilities to do evaluation. This is something where government should invest more. And then once you have these, then you can really evaluate the effectiveness of policies, either through, and this is something that is not always feasible, but randomized control trials, or using quasi-experiment, which is something, for example, Beata mentioned a paper we did on state aid in the UK, and let me link to one of the comments that were made on state aid. I think here it needs to be clear what the objective is. Often we expect state aid for underdeveloped region in Europe to sort of lead to higher productivity. That's not the point of these policies. The point of these policies is often just to decrease interregional inequalities. And I think on this, the evidence is more in favor than not. But again, being clear on what is the objective that the policy needs to achieve is important for evaluation. Second point you made was a question on mix for what is the right mix of policies for countries that I would say are more on the adoption side of the curve rather than the frontier innovation. And here, I think, again, let me mention the report. I think the examples that are brought in are quite important, and this also relates to some of the evidence that Beata brought on skills. So it's not just about supply side vertical policy, sort of support to a particular sector, support to a particular firm or type of firms, but it's much more about having, I would say, framework conditions in place, and corruption was mentioned, so having strong institution. Secondly, we should not forget demand side policies, and we haven't talked about those a lot, but the role of government as, for example, client, the role of regulations, the role of certainty and stability of policies. These are all things that matter much more, I think, for the diffusion of knowledge. And then the last point, openness is important. The report focuses on FDI, but let me also mention that we are doing some work with colleagues at the World Bank, and the cost of acquiring embedded knowledge in advanced ICT capital is much higher in this region, and Beata might say something more on this, than in other sort of more advanced part of Europe. And so, lowering the cost of importing technologies to then develop the use further in the country, I think is also particularly important. So that's why, again, I would say an additional spillover from all.
Sasha, please.
Also, very quickly, for full agreement with Chiara on this mix of policies and the importance of framework conditions, access to skills, and so on and so forth. I think these are essential both for advanced and also less advanced countries, and there is quite strong research essentially showing that the region development is very much driven by the quality of institutions and access to these basic kind of endowments. Now, very quickly on the industrial policy at the EU level, I think I'm fully with you. Here I'm speaking more as one of those helping Professor Draghi to prepare the report rather than from my current position. Look, fragmentation is one of the key problems that we're facing. So we actually, kind of going ahead on the single market, having this functional space of 450 million people where firms could operate freely across the borders. I think that would be an amazing gain. In a similar vein, and also, I mean, we are aware of the work by IMF colleagues there. If you implement industrial policies in fragmented ways, so essentially this is to some extent self-defeating, and this is creating further barriers. So from that point of view, there is a very strong case for coordination at the EU level. You are aware also of the discussions during COVID on support which individual member states were providing to their firms, and also the worries that this could fragment the internal market even more. So fully with you.
Last word.
So on assessing success of industrial policies, so Chiara mentioned what you need. What should you look at? Well, cost benefit, as well as impact going beyond the targeted region or targeted sector. So in other words, interlinkages or possible positive or negative spillover to other sectors or entities. On Nina's question, yes, there are two types of countries in our portfolio. So countries that need to change their growth model from catching up to innovation and countries that are still catching up. So if you think about Eastern EU member states, they need to grow on their innovation. We analyzed in our recent regional economic prospects the list of 2,000 companies with largest R&D expenditure. There are only 3 firms from our regions of operation. 1 Turkish firm in defense electronics and 2 pharmaceutical firms, 1 from Hungary and Slovenia. So they need to get there if they want to switch their model. For less advanced countries that are catching up, investment promotion is the way to go. Bringing FDI to their countries. We actually talk about this, about investment promotion being effective, inexpensive, and it's also a way of bringing R&D and innovation activities to the country. On special economic zones, very interesting idea of making them conditional, making renewal conditional on success. I like that very much. As special economic zones can also be about services. 2 weeks ago, I was in Astana, where they have Astana International Financial Center, where they operate under English law. They are working on their own arbitration mechanism. They have some tax preferences, but this is an example where you can't fix the business climate everywhere. You fix it in a particular location. That's one objective. Another one may be what Chiara was talking about, bringing employment to backward regions. Now, to your question, why we see negative effects going beyond, that's because often special economic zones are located in sort of backward regions, so regions that are actually doing quite poorly. On corruption, we worry about corruption, and in particular, we worry about the fact that countries with higher levels of corruption do these distortive industrial policies, right? They do what's cheap and easy, and that's what creates the problem of state capture, and therefore, in those countries, horizontal policies are more valuable than industrial policies that target particular entities.
Great. Thank you so much. Apologies for being a bad chair and letting it go too far, but there was a lot of content. Thank you. Bye-bye.